Hello and a very warm welcome to Public Forum. I'm Amandra Bhatt. As the year draws to a close, the UPA too is also moving towards its final days. It is perhaps appropriate to take a look at the foreign policy gains and losses this year. And to discuss the same, we are joined in our studios by three distinguished guests. Please welcome Ambassador Lalit Mansingh. He's a former Foreign Secretary. Sanjay Kapoor, Senior Journalist, Editor, Hard News. And we're also joined by Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, a Dean in the Jindal School of International Affairs. Welcome to Public Forum. Dr. Chaulia, I'd like to begin with you. What would be the key takeaways on the foreign policy front this year?
I think we have witnessed some degree of insecurity in our neighbourhood, uncertainty, a lot of political fallout. There have been change of regime in Pakistan, and there is an impending change of regime potentially in Bangladesh. We have had some misses in Sri Lanka with the Commonwealth meeting and the controversies around the undelivered justice for Tamil-speaking people of the north and east. I think Nepal has had an election too, which is still riddled in uncertainty about the constitution writing process. And as you mentioned, we've had some serious fallouts with the United States. One which should have actually been a bigger one than it turned out to be was the Edward Snowden revelations about India being one of the most spied upon nations of the National Security Agency. And two, of course, was the humiliation of our diplomat, which is totally unwarranted. So I think, and then there's been the usual breaks and other gatherings. There have been, I would say, so it's a mixed bag. Some would argue that we have lost ground in our neighborhood and that we have made errors in our policies. I'm not so sure. But nonetheless, and then, as you said, we ourselves are entering a transition period. We ourselves have a lame duck regime right now. So I think the economy has slowed down, and that has also had an impact on our foreign standing, on our global standing. If we're growing at 7 or 8%, people take us more seriously than if we're at 4.5% or 5%. So I think overall, we got shaken badly by the tapering rumors of the U.S. Federal Reserve. The rupee took a hit. And generally, I think people have come to see India as somehow not as reliable in the global economic standings as it used to be. Our fiscal deficit has been ballooning. So all these domestic factors also impact on our global standing. So overall, I would say, I don't think we had any spectacular achievements this year from Indian foreign policy point of view, and maybe some lost ground that needs to be regained.
Professor Chaulia, do you also think that this is perhaps because we saw foreign policy being hijacked by domestic politics, regional politics, compulsions of regional politics?
To some extent, I mean, with the case of Bangladesh and Sri Lanka do stand out. But then, we deal with so many other nations beyond our own neighborhood also. And if there's, I don't think there's any domestic regional compulsion when it comes to, for example, our relations with China or with the US, right? So, or with the Europeans. I think that factor has deepened in a way the impact of coalition politics and the federal structure of the state. And I've said this before on your channel that there are also some positives. There are some states which are doing well in terms of cross-border relations, like Punjab's Badals are very keen on building positive relations with the Pakistani Punjab and so on. And Nitish Kumar in Bihar has been wanting good relations with Nepal and with southern Chinese provinces for trade reasons. It's not always negative. But I think the weakening of the state per se, state structure, and the perception of a weak leadership, political at the top, has definitely impacted us. I mean, we don't have a colossus who's striding the world, spreading the Indian message and the Indian value system and the Indian position on anything, So to that extent, we lack those tough personalities who can probably be global leaders. We don't have really a statesman per se, at the top of the nation right now. So all these things do convey a message of that India is, somehow unable to break through. To use Ruchir Sharma's phrase, we are not one of the breakout nations. And the reason is not just economic. I think there's also an absence of political leadership. Because see, at the end of the day, the foreign policy bureaucracy can formulate positions on tactical issues, day-to-day issues, but long-term strategic vision. I mean, look at the Dault Beg Oldi incident. That was one of the big setbacks this year, I think. We were left guessing. And the Chinese, why did they come in? Why did they get out? We were all, even now we don't have clues. So that was a big setback. So we have many problems with China, which have intensified this year, and with the United States. So I guess, it's a trying period.
Dr. Chaulia, clearly, an incident like this shows American contempt for citizens as well as laws of other countries, American exceptionalism at display here, as Ambassador Mansingh said.
Well, I call it double standards, because they claim privileges for their diplomats around the world despite their committing serious offenses. But, I think, in fact, Obama said earlier this year that he was focused on the reconciliation with Iran, and on trying to get a deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And of course they have the Asian pivot, which is to contain China in East Asia. So India, where does India figure in all these high priorities of the United States foreign policy? We are not so sure. And obviously it's supposedly a central cog in the wheel for the Asian pivot, but it's not been very well defined. And we have our own preferences. We don't want to be manipulated or played by any major power. We have our own neighborhood concerns as well. So, I'll go back to the Snowden revelations. I mean, that was a big setback to relations. It should not have, been the case that we are so, immensely spied upon. And that just shows the level of distrust. Even when it comes to, you have senior State Department people off the record who keep saying, we wonder if India becomes a permanent member of the Security Council, how will it vote? Can we rely upon it to always, solidly back our positions on humanitarian intervention, these kind of things? Of course not. So I think, we are not pliable. In fact, they are finding even Japan difficult to handle now. Japan, which is so close to the United States, has been frustrating them off and on. Most recently, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe visited the Yasukuni Shrine, and the Americans condemned it. So they have, I think, expectations which is based on the notion of asymmetry, which means, we are big, we are more powerful, and they need us. But what they don't realize is that it can also be the other way around. And I think that's where we need to do a lot of hard work in the new year to try and rebuild the broken trust, and to make the Americans realize that India is in a way indispensable. If Iran is indispensable for settling the Middle East chessboard, then India is far more important for the larger Asian and even global stakes. And even though we have stumbled of late, we will need, in other words, our weight has not declined per se. What has happened is the economy has slowed down, and as Ambassador Mansingh said, we are, we have lost the sheen in a way. But doesn't mean that because of geography, because of our size, because of our potential in the future, in the long term, they should not be playing with us. And I think that's the message we have sent out. I think it's a correct one. Some people are saying, we are being jingoistic and all that. The point is, you give respect and take respect, and that's not happened. So in this case, but I think we have to also think about what lies ahead. And of course, the American perception of us depends a lot on how they are squaring up with the Chinese. And that itself has been some degree of flux. The Americans really don't know which way the new Chinese leadership is going. On one hand, they're hoping that it's going to do all kinds of liberal economic reforms and become friendlier. On the other hand, these air defense zones and all these things they've done in East Asia have been very provocative. And endangering American interests in the region. So I think they have to come down to a basic political decision at the top, which Ambassador was mentioning. Forget the legalese. If the White House wants, they could have ended this issue long ago, with a high-level decision saying, let's cool it. But they're not. So I think it just shows that maybe even Obama is unable to grapple with all the structural divisions of power within the U.S. system. And doesn't seem to be, well, if he does something, it's likely that the Republicans will go hammer and tongs at him saying, he's contravening the Constitution, and, he's not respecting checks and balances. Congress has not been cooperative. So if you actually look at America's foreign policy here, it's been pretty bad too. They have not had very many successes. So they're struggling. So it's understandable that that kind of nation is unable to also have a clear will and vision as to what are my priorities.
Dr. Chaulia, what is India's dilemma in Afghanistan? Why are we reluctant to play a role that goes beyond humanitarian and capacity building and, training?
Well, one of the factors is that Pakistan and Afghanistan have their own equation. And the fear is that if we provide lethal weaponry, if we get the export permissions and so on from our own suppliers, foreign suppliers, the fear is that the Pakistanis will also intensify, cross-border terrorism in India as a tit-for-tat and so on. But I think we do need to create some kind of balance, because Afghanistan is very weak vis-a-vis Pakistan through conventional weaponry. So I don't think we will gainsay the demands of the Afghan government. They're legitimate. But more important is April they have a presidential election. And people are saying Ashraf Ghani, one of the pro-Western candidates, is likely to be the front runner. So I think, and President Karzai himself has not indicated who he will endorse. And that's a big guessing game going on right now. So I think once the dust clears and there's a new establishment. Remember, Afghanistan doesn't yet have a proper political party system. So it's still very individual driven and clan driven and so on, the politics. So we'll have to wait for April and then see who comes into power, and then work together to beef up Afghan security so that they are conventionally at least somewhat capable of holding their own against the Pakistani bombardment and the aerial intrusions and so on that happen across the Durand line. And in a way, geopolitically, you can argue that if we keep the Pakistanis somehow tied down on the Western Front, we will not have to face the same kind of jihadist violence in Kashmir and the rest of India. But I think it's still, we want to be a little bit careful in terms of tipping the balance in a way which leads to more pressure on us, on our own borders. So I think that's one reason. But overall, the relationship, it has been, I think, solid. And to 2014, with two new governments in Delhi and Kabul, we'll need to work harder on that.
Dr. Chaulia, Sri Lanka, in the case of Sri Lanka, for instance, now there are worries that the Colombo-Beijing relationship could improve to the detriment of India, because we lost out on a chance to go there and raise this issue at a multilateral forum.
Yeah, I mean, see, the Rajapakshas have been blackmailing us for a long time with the China card. So we should not have succumbed to it. But at the same time, we need to be mindful of the encroachment in our neighborhood. I mean, I think this year, what the Chinese leadership has shown is that they are actually, in many ways, more hardline on the neighborhood than even their predecessors. They're talking about economic reform domestically, but they are taking far more aggressive positions than even the previous leadership had. So it doesn't augur well for us. Because it means that the encirclement or encroachment, or what Jaswant Singh calls a strategic confinement of India, is well underway with under Chinese leadership. So we need to be very wary of this. I think one of the problems in our policy overall has been that we are not, we've tended to be very ambiguous about China because of the trade relationship, because they can hurt us here and there. But at the same time, there's a degree of, we have this whole, the Prime Minister has been saying, for example, there's enough room for both of us, across the world, in Africa, Latin America. But the point is, they are strategic competitors. And if you look at the cyber hacking they've been doing, it's as bad as what the Americans have done, given the capacities the Chinese have on our key installations, right? If you look at the of Dault Beg Oldi in Ladakh and so on. So this year has actually, in many ways, uncovered the, full fangs of the dragon, and we need to be absolutely unambiguous about it. See, the more we try to be, try to be a little, we waffle on the Chinese issue, be it on beefing up our defenses, be it on building counterbalancing maneuvers across the region, we should not be. I think we should be very absolutely unambiguous about it, and that is one of the, I think, missing elements. Because we talk about equidistance, non-alignment 2.0 and so on, it just doesn't work in this day and age. We are not pawns of the United States, as I have said before. but doesn't mean that we don't have our own issues with the Chinese. We are not doing it because at the behest of the Americans, right? So Sri Lanka, you take Bangladesh,
right.
Everywhere, I think we should not fall into the blackmail. The smaller powers will always try to play us off against the Chinese and try to extract more from us or try to get us. So if we are critical of Rajapakshas, they have not at all heeded our concerns. We should be critical about them. By which I mean not miss important meetings like Commonwealth, but use all means possible to pressure this regime and tell them that we are not going to accept what the Chinese are planning to do in our neighborhood. So, and similarly, we have to reach out. We have to be far more proactive in Africa and Latin America, where of course China is far ahead of us. In fact, you look at Syria. I mean, even the chemical weapons disposal, the Russians took the lead. The Chinese have sent some symbolic, accompanying equipment for the disarmament of chemical weapons. I don't see any Indian initiative which has been mentioned in the media, which shows that we have actually been a player in the chemical weapons disarmament process of the last 6 months, which have been the global headline. So we need to do a lot more beyond our region and in many ways match the Chinese and outdo the Chinese. For that we need not only attention but investment of resources. Unfortunately, foreign affairs, this government has not, I think, done enough.
Well, that's it for now in this edition of Public Forum. Thanks for watching.